devotees, welcome back once again. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we are continuing with our series on Srila Rupa Goswami's Ishtadev, Govindadev or Govindaji. I believe this is the 10th lecture in this series. In our last lecture, we discussed in detail how the great Raj Jai Singh II made elaborate arrangements for Radha Govinda in his newly created city of Jaipur in the mid-1700s. And we concluded by describing how popular Radha Govinda were by the fact that Gaudiya Vaisnavas flocked in huge numbers from Mayapur and Jagannath Puri and Vrindavan to take their darshan, to take darshan of Radha Govinda. We also mentioned that as a result, Jaipur became for some time the main seat of learning for Gaudiya Vaisnavas. But history has shown that there was a significant problem as a result of this. And that was that certain other spiritual movements, who at that time were even more prominent in Jaipur, became jealous of the attention that Raj Jai Singh was giving to the Gaudiya Vaisnavas. And this was particularly true of the Ramanandi sect, who at that time were very much involved in deity worship in Jaipur. The Ramanandis were an offshoot of the Sri Sampradaya in South India, an authorized offshoot. At one point in history, Sri Ramanujacharya, the founder of the Sri Sampradaya, had been very successful in establishing his Sampradaya, wherein they worship Lakshmi Narayan in the south of India, in South India. But he wanted to expand his movement to North India. So he instructed a senior disciple, whose name was Ramananda, to take up this task. And Ramananda and his followers, or his men, you could say, they went north and they settled in Ayodhya Dham. And after some time, they began worshiping Sitaram, because Ayodhya was the capital of Ramachandra's kingdom. So they began worshiping Sitaram. And as time went by, they became known as Ramanandis. And by the time Jai Singh came to power in Amer, and then Jaipur in Rajasthan, the Ramanandis were quite powerful. They spread all over North India. And again, they became a little jealous of the Gaudiyas, who weren't that popular, prominent yet in Jaipur. The Ramanandis felt that Jai Singh was giving the Gaudiyas too much attention and too much facility. So they made an official, very strong objection to the king. They challenged that the Gaudiyas were not actually a bona fide, recognized sampradaya, specifically because they had no commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Each of the four accepted sampradayas, the Sri Sampradaya, which comes from Lakshmi Devi, the Madhva Sampradaya, which comes from Lord Brahma, the Vishnu Swami Sampradaya, which comes from Lord Shiva, and the Nimbarka Sampradaya from the four Kumaras, they all have commentaries on Vedanta Sutra. The Vedanta Sutra, you could say, is a summary of all the Vedic literatures, the four Vedas in particular, the Vedanta Sutra, in code form. Like we often quote the first aphorism of Vedanta Sutra in our public lectures, Atato Brahma Jignasya. Now that you have come to the human form of life, now is the time for spiritual inquiry, for spiritual realization. Vedanta Sutra. So it's always been customary for an acharya to establish his sampradaya on the basis of a Vedanta Sutra commentary. But the followers of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we accept the Srimad Bhagavatam as the natural commentary on Vedanta Sutra. And our sampradaya never felt a need to compile another. That was sufficient, Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, another thing is that the Ramanandis, they objected to the worship of Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani. They didn't like that Radharani was on the altar. And the reasoning was because, well, she's not mentioned in Vedic scriptures. Who is she? Which actually is somewhat true in the sense that one of her names, as we've discussed this before, maybe last year, one of Radharani's names is Veda Gopya. Veda Gopya, meaning she's hidden in the Vedas. And it was actually Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as the Yuga Avatar, who revealed Srimati Radharani to the world. So the Ramanandis demanded that Jai Singh II remove Radharani from the altar, from the new temple that had been constructed for Radha Govinda as part of the town planning of Jaipur. So all this became a huge problem for Jai Singh II. Why? Because as king, he had to keep the peace between all the different spiritual groups in Jaipur. He may have been a Gaudiya at heart, and he was, but as king, he needed to diffuse any friction between the different spiritual camps. Diplomacy. Kings have to engage in diplomacy. So, until things were resolved, he had Srimati Radharani taken off the altar in that new temple and placed back in his own palace. And he told the Gaudiyas that they had to prove beyond any doubt that they were in fact a bona fide sampradaya. So he declared that there would be a debate between the Ramanandis and the Gaudiyas at a place called Galita or Galta, both terms are used, at a certain time just outside Jaipur. And at that debate, the Gaudiyas had to prove in whatever way that they were bona fide, foremost by providing a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. And this created a big commotion in the Vaishnava community, in the Gaudiya community. First of all, because I was reading in the Institute, devotees struggled to understand how Sri Radha had been separated from Govindaji. How could it be that Radha was separated from her beloved Govindaji, Radha Govinda? But Baladev, a very prominent student of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, both of whom were living at that time, wrote to the devotees in Jaipur not to be alarmed. Because he said, Radharani is simply exhibiting her man, her transcendental anger, as a result of something Krishna may have said to her, and she left the altar to sulk somewhere. Hare Krishna. As for proving that the Gaudiyas were bona fide, Raj Jai Singh II himself, our hero, he wrote to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who was the leading Gaudiya Vaisnava Acharya and scholar at the time, asking him to come and debate with the Ramanandis at Galta. Now Vishwanath and Jai Singh often exchanged letters, I found out. I read in the Vrindavan Research Institute that only a few months before, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur had written to Jai Singh complaining that large numbers of dacoits was the word used, or thieves, had been robbing pilgrims on the road between Vrindavan and Jaipur. And he requested Jai Singh to do something about it. You're the king. Send some of your army there and stop these dacoits. I saw the letter. It was like nectar. When Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur received the letter from Jai Singh, the king, to come and debate, he had to refuse because he was just too old and fragile to travel. So he requested his student, Baladev, to go and debate with the Ramanandis. Now he stressed to Baladev that it was a very significant moment in the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. For if Baladev lost the debate, the Gaudiya's reputation in India would be greatly diminished. And the relevance of Krishna's dear most beloved, Srimati Radharani, would be in question. So our hero, we have a lot of heroes, Baladev, as you know, later to become Baladeva Vidyabhusana, he was born near the famous town of Ramuna in Orissa, eastern India. And after his initial schooling in Sanskrit, rhetoric, and logic, he left home as a young man to travel to holy places and hear from the saints who lived in those holy places. Now, at one point in his travels, he studied and he mastered the teachings of Srila Madhvacharya. Then, armed with those teachings, he accepted the renounced order of sannyas, and he traveled and preached all over India. And eventually he came to Jagannath Puri, where he met a disciple of the famous Rasikananda Prabhu, and that disciple's name was Pandit Radha Damodar, who you could say infused Baladev with the glories and teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And actually he ended up taking Diksha, or formal initiation, from this Gaudiya Vaisnava, Pandit Radha Damodar. And he spent a number of years studying Srila Jiva Goswami's Sandarbhas with his initiating guru. And it's written that he mastered, quote, all of Gaudiya Vaishnavism's philosophical conclusions, unquote. That's how I read it. So after he'd mastered all of that, you can see how erudite he was. Pandit Radha Damodar, his guru, told Baladev to go to Vrindavan and study Srimad Bhagavatam, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, the king of all scriptures, under Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So it's this Baladev that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur sent on his behalf to Jaipur. Watch out, Ramanandis. So in time, Baladev arrived at Jai Singh's court, and he entered into what was described as a very animated debate with the Ramanandi scholars, none of whom could stand up to his impressive scholarship and very keen intellect. But the Ramanandi's key argument, again, was that without a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, the Gaudiyas had no, you could say, systematic philosophy and no authority. Baladev did use the Gaudiya argument that, Lord Chaitanya accepted Srimad Bhagavatam as a natural commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Nevertheless, these scholars insisted that the Gaudiyas must have their own written commentary. In fact, they insisted that Baladev, or somebody, produce a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, the Upanishads, and Bhagavad Gita within 3 months. Now, of course, Baladeva was competent to write these commentaries, but you could say the deadline that these scholars were giving was unreasonable, like 12 weeks. And it was unlikely he would finish in time. So what did our hero do? What did Baladeva do? He did what every sincere devotee of Krishna does when things look hopeless. He took shelter of Krishna. And he went to the Surya Mahal, that's the official term for the temple, that new temple of Radha Govinda. And he took shelter of Govindaji. And I was reading that he was initially shocked to see that Srimati Radharani was not there. But he knew she would be reinstated beside her beloved Govindaji if he could provide a proper commentary on the scriptures requested by the Ramanandis. Because if the Gaudiyas were recognized, whatever actions they took would have to be accepted. And they would bring Radharani right back as fast as they could to stand beside Govindaji. It's a very exciting drama, real life drama. But Baladeva felt his only recourse was the Lord himself. And coming before Govindaji, he spoke to the deity. He related all that had happened, and he prayed very sincerely for the Lord's intervention. And so that night, Govindaji appeared to Baladeva in a dream. And smiling, Govindaji said, quote, "My dear Baladeva, do not worry. Just write the commentary. I will guide you. I will guide you. By my blessings, the work will not only be completed in time, but it will also be faultless." This is the dream. So the next morning, Baladeva woke up excited and empowered, and he requested writing material and reference books from the king, from Jai Singh. And first he took up the commentary on Vedanta Sutra, then the Upanishads, and then finally Bhagavad Gita. And to make a long story short, 3 months, at the conclusion of 3 months, Baladeva placed his books before, you could say, an incredulous audience of his adversaries at Gatila or at Galta, who I was reading could do nothing but praise him after reviewing everything that he had done. In particular, his illustrious commentary on Vedanta Sutra. That was the main thing. His commentary on Vedanta Sutra, which he called Govinda Bhasya, because Govinda had empowered him what to write. He called it Govinda Bhasya. That was especially appreciated. And I read afterwards, actually, some of those Ramanandis, they switched camps. They actually took shelter of Baladeva Vidyabhusana. And scholars say that Baladeva had proven that the Gaudiya's philosophical conclusion, Achinta Bheda Bhed, was the synthesis of all the other Sampradaya's views, thus establishing Gaudiya Vaishnavism as a Sampradaya in its own right. Not actually, let's clarify, not actually a Sampradaya in its own right, but more like a branch of the Madhva Sampradaya. Although we are a Shakha, we're a branch of the Madhva Sampradaya, we're not fully aligned with them. Thus, we required our own commentary on the scriptures, on Vedanta Sutra. When Srila Baladeva produced his commentary, the Ramanandis actually had no choice but to accept that we're connected to the Madhva Sampradaya, but that we have our own flavor. I know I've been, to South India, and I've been to Udupi, and where Udupi Krishna is. That's the seat of the Madhvas, and a little tension there when you come in as a Gaudiya. They don't fully appreciate us because there's some differences, and we acknowledge those differences, such as Krishna's loving pastimes with the gopis. That's the contribution of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and our Gaudiya Acharyas. Krishna's very loving Madhurya Leela pastimes with the gopis. So they don't accept that so much. So, we consider ourselves a branch. A branch is connected to the trunk. Yet a branch is also significantly different from the trunk. Thus we conclude, with all due respect, that a branch has leaves and fruits, which the trunk doesn't have. Hare Krishna. So we're known as the Brahma Madhva, yes, Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Vaisnava Sampradaya. Many of our philosophical conclusions are very much as they are in the Madhva Sampradaya. So many truths are there. That's why we're considered a branch of the Madhvas, because we agree on so many things. Just some little differences like that. So we're a branch. The Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. So all glories to Baladev. And as a result of Baladev's victory over the Ramanandis, Jai Singh granted the Gaudiya Vaishnavas exclusive rights to the seva of Govindaji. Previously it was shared by the Ramanandis. So Jai Singh, in his heart he's a Gaudiya. So he granted the Gaudiya Vaishnavas exclusive rights to the service of Govindaji. And what can we say? Radharani gave up her man. She gave up her anger and was taken back to the temple and put on the altar next to her beloved Govindadev, where they continue to be worshipped to the present day. And also, it's important to mention that the king was so impressed by Baladev's achievement that he gave him the honorific title Vidyabhusana. So that's how we refer to him, actually. Baladev Vidyabhusana. And Jai Singh, I was reading, this is interesting. Jai Singh was able to appreciate himself the scholarly nature of Baladev Vidyabhusana because he was a scholar as well. He was not only a Raja Rishi, a saintly person sitting on the throne, but he was also a scholar. I read that he had written a number of deep philosophical spiritual books, including Vaidika Vaishnava Sarita Grantha, that was one book, Prabhu Vaidiki Puja Paditi, another book, and Satchidananda Atma Padhartha Bhanu Chandrika, another of his books, and Maitikya Prakashika. These are very deep philosophical books exploring different spiritual subject matters. And they were and they are generally accepted by the teachers of all the sampradayas. This is our hero, Jai Singh. We've heard about him on the battlefield. We've heard him, engaging in diplomacy within his own kingdom. We've heard, how when he goes to Vrindavan, he takes off his shoes and throws away the umbrella. No security. He walks around the 12 forests of Braj. Oh, if only we had rulers like that today. So now with this great victory, Jai Singh himself was free to give his very heart and soul to the worship of Radha Govinda. In fact, I was reading that he redesigned his royal insignia and his official stamp. Kings have an official stamp, both of which read, Shri Govinda Charana Shavhaya Jaya Simha Sharana. Jaya Singha Sharana. Quote, the lotus feet of Shri Govinda are Savaya Jaya Singha's refuge. Hare Krishna. And they also found the famous Sri Venkata Acharya of the Ramanuja Sampradaya. He acknowledged Jai Singh also. He later wrote about him. I just stumbled across this quote the other day. Quote, that wise king, Jai Singh, accomplished the destruction of the opposition, just as the man-lion, Narasingha, previously managed to allay the hostility of his opposition, Hiranyakashipu. So after everything had been concluded, this is really nice. Baladeva Vidyabhusana received a hero's welcome upon his return to Vrindavan. Wow, the hero's welcome. Everyone came out. They were so impressed. He defended Radha Govinda. He defended Radharani. He defended the Gaudiya Vaisnavas. We were there. We are in now because of this one devotee. Of course, empowered by his previous acharyas and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, protected by Lord Nrsingadev. Baladeva Vidyabhusana came back to Vrindavan, a veritable hero. And when he came back to Vrindavan, he installed a deity that he named Vijay Govinda. Vijay means, victorious Govinda, always victorious Govinda. And he gave that name to that deity based on a verse that he had written in his Govinda Bhasya. The Govinda Bhasya was establishing that we are a bona fide sampradaya, part of the Madhva sampradaya. Our commentary on Vedanta Sutra, Govinda Bhasya, and therein he wrote a verse. And I found the verse, which we'll happily share with all of you, written by Baladeva Vidyabhusana. Quote, bestowing upon me an ornament in the form of knowledge, he who is most lofty led me to fame. May that Sri Govinda, whose commentary appeared to me in a dream, that companion of Sri Radha, he whose limbs are pleasantly bent, be ever victorious. There it shows that Govinda appeared to him in a dream. Some other, sometimes it's mentioned that Govinda, the deity, actually spoke to him when he was sitting there. But this is the authorized version, and he himself explains that. Whose commentary appeared to me in a dream. That companion of Sri Radha, he whose limbs are pleasantly bent, be ever victorious. Vijay Govinda. So in Vrindavan, Baladeva Vidyabhusana was awarded the seva of taking care of the Radhashama Sundar temple. A service actually that he performed until his last breath. And his sacred samadhi lies in a secluded part of Radha Shamasundar's temple compound. Now, I've been there many times, and for whatever reason I never knew that, so I'm going to go maybe tomorrow, pay my respects after hearing everything that he's done for us. Baladeva Vidyabhusana, all these devotees, these acharyas, these kings, and even unknown devotees, they did so much to establish the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And we, our humble selves, are carrying on that tradition. What a responsibility we have upon our shoulders to continue it as the illustrious, glorious International Society for Krishna Consciousness, established by our beloved Srila Prabhupada. We know how Prabhupada struggled. And now we're hearing how so many other devotees struggled. We were reading the other day how Prabhupada said preaching is not easy. Not easy to establish a spiritual movement in the material world. So these devotees made so many sacrifices. We must always remember that. Keep our mind fixed on the mission, contributing. Don't get deviated. Don't become frivolous. Don't become lazy. We've inherited this movement. We're to do the best that we can in our humble ways to not only maintain it, but to continue it on in various ways to the next 10,000 years. So our hero, Jai Singh II, left this world on September 21st, 1743, at the young age of 54. And his court poet, Krishna Bhatta, says, I was reading, when Jai Singh II left his body, he gave up his body in full Krishna consciousness, uttering the names, Radhe Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda. He left. He was a king. He wasn't a Babaji, at Radha Govinda. He wasn't a Goswami in Vrindavan. He wasn't an erudite scholar here or there, Vaishnava. He's Kshatriya, a Kshatriya, one who protects Dharma. And he left in full Krishna consciousness. I wish there was a time machine. We can go back and help him. Of course, we have similar challenges now. Every generation of Vaishnavas has a certain set of challenges, and we take those on with full conviction. That's the success of our lives. How much we can assist Srila Prabhupada in establishing the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in this world, which is the perfect formula for continuing this great legacy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. How blessed we are, how fortunate we are. We always have to take a moment and just stop and just remember our good fortune. This is who we are. And this is the purpose of our lives. To make sure that Prabhupada's mission is as successful as we can make it, and then hand the baton, in the race, the baton. There's four persons who run around that relay race, and they give the baton to the next, and to the next, and to the next. So my generation has to hand the baton to the next generation, and they run with it, and they give it to the next generation like this. Somehow we're part of this great movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So recently I found out, I have information, where is the grave of Jai Singh II? I found out in Rajasthan. So I'm also planning to go see Radha Govinda. I mean, that's the natural consequence of this series of lectures, isn't it? I'm sure you're all hankering to come to Vrindavan and visit many of the holy places we've been discussing for the last year. And I'm sure you'll be inspired at some point to, take that 3-hour drive to Jaipur and go to the temple and, see Govinda, Radha Govinda. I'm going to go there. I'm also going to go to where Jai Singh is entombed, where he's buried, his grave, and offer my deepest respect and gratitude for everything he did for Radha Govinda and the Gaudiya Vaisnavas. Hare Krishna. So I'd like to finish today with Srila Prabhupada's dedication in his Bhagavad Gita, as it is. It's a perfect way to finish the class today, to acknowledge Baladeva Vidyabhusana. And it's a perfect way to acknowledge his contribution, because Prabhupada chose him as the person to dedicate his translation of Bhagavad Gita to the world, Bhagavad Gita as it is. And you've heard this many times, but I think this is a proper way to finish. Prabhupada writes in the beginning of his translation of Bhagavad Gita as it is, he writes famously, to Shri Baladev Vidyabhusana, who presented so nicely the Govinda Bhashya commentary on Vedanta philosophy. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhus. I think I have like one or two more lectures on Govindaji and Jaipur and some of the kings that came after Jai Singh and the incredible things that they did to preserve and continue the worship of Radha Govinda. We'll be back in a couple of days. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, International Society for Krishna Consciousness ki, back home, back to Godhead ki, take all the fallen conditioned souls we can, back home, back to Godhead ki, Gaur Premanandi, Jai Jai Sisi Radhe, Sharm Shri Shri Radha Govinda Deva ki. Hare Krishna.